I don't know. I am so blessed to be able to do what God allows me to do. And I want to share some things with you this morning. Most of you know that we are an independent church, and yet we choose to associate with a movement of churches called Converge. Converge is an international organization. We have a local expression of it called Converge Rocky Mountain. It's a little over 60 churches that are here in Colorado. We're in Wyoming, Nebraska, Utah, and down in New Mexico. And we have a guy, Paul Mitten. He is our executive minister. And so he kind of tries to herd all of us together and help us do what we commit to do. Once again, though we're independent, we affiliate together because we believe in starting new churches and we believe in strengthening the churches that are out there. The reason I go there is I want to tell you about a story that he shared with me recently. As you can imagine, he travels quite a bit because we cover a lot of ground in our region. And on one of his trips, he was reading a book on churches and church growth. And the woman sitting next to him on the plane noticed that, and she mentioned to him, "I don't go to church anymore. I used to go faithfully. I love God, but I don't love his church." He said, yeah, wow. He said the conversation continued, and as he listened to her story, she told him of a physically abusive marriage and how she had tried for years to salvage it. Eventually, she was forced to remove herself and her kids from the danger of that situation, and unfortunately, the relationship ended in divorce. She turned to her church for help during this time, and like any good church would, they did their best to try and get this family in with some good professional counseling. Unfortunately, the husband refused to go, and it's kind of hard to fix a relationship when only half of the relationship is there. She said, "When I finally found the courage to leave, I didn't realize I was also leaving the church. You see, they told me that if I left him, I would no longer be welcome in the church because God hates divorce." She said, "I haven't been back to a church since then." We don't know all of the details. We cannot be here from afar. We can't judge the husband or the wife or the church. We don't have the capacity, the ability, or enough information to do that. But here's what I do know, is that there must have been some way to love her, to love him, to be able to stand firm on the biblical foundation without having to kick her out of the church. The point behind the story is that she's representative of millions who have over the years been hurt by the church or by someone in the church. She's one of a growing population who claim to know God, claim to love God, but they don't love his church. And a definition for them, honestly, is Christian atheists. See, a Christian atheist is a person who claims to love God, but lives certain areas of their lives as if God didn't exist. We claim to know God, we claim to love God, we claim to be a Jesus follower, and yet there are some parts of our lives where we look a whole lot more like someone who doesn't believe in God. Welcome to week 2 of the series. It is called The Christian Atheist, and let me help you understand. This is not meant, it is not designed to sucker punch any one of us. It is not meant to stab you in the eye and make you feel guilty. The whole objective behind this series is to identify those areas where we behave one way, but maybe we should behave differently. And let me tell you, the only one who can judge whether you act more like a Christian or more like an atheist in a particular area of your life is you. I can only judge me and my behavior. I will never judge you and yours. So it's meant to be an introspective look at Christianity, at the behaviors of Christians, and to ask ourselves, gosh, in this particular area of my life, do I look more like an atheist or a Christian? This woman's story is an extreme example. This form of Christian atheism about not loving the church, it has a lot of different faces. Let me share some of them with you. To some, Sunday has become just another day of the week. In our 24/7, never-stop society, people have to work, right? Retail outlets are open, restaurants are open, commerce happens. I have to work. They make me work Sundays. How am I supposed to go to church? There's another mentality that says, you know what? I work Monday through Saturday, and the lawn's got to get mowed sometime, right? There's another mentality that says, why sleep in church? Man, my bed's way more comfortable. Some of you are laughing for a very good reason. Okay, so this one hits close to home for me personally. Please understand, this is not judging anyone else. It's judging my behavior, but there is a mentality out there that says my kid is in competitive sports, and I travel every weekend. See, both of our older girls were competitive athletes, and there were weekends that found Winnie in northern Colorado with one child, and I would be in Nevada with the other. Church Sunday, are you kidding me? But I will tell you, I will admit at that time I was an actual no-kidding atheist. Didn't give a rip about God, didn't believe in God. So I did act like you would expect me to act. But the problem is that there are many, many, many Christians who feel the same way, that somehow their 8-year-old's baseball game on Sunday morning is more important than that 8-year-old's spiritual growth. Some people choose not to be part of the church because of the scandals. I mean, realistically, look over the past several years and the numbers of very prominent leaders of churches who have done really, really bad things, and I get it. Some refuse to go to church. So this series is based on a book by Craig Groeschel of the same name called Christian Atheist. And in it, he talks about this group of people that he terms the super spiritual Christian. See, they know exactly what the perfect church is supposed to look like, and they ain't found one yet. See, one of them says the music's too loud. Another says, well, it's not loud enough. Or it's too contemporary. No, it's too traditional. The message is watered down. Or, oh my God, it's so theologically heavy, I can't understand a word of it. They're the people who say, oh, that church is way too charismatic. Or there's others that say, well, how come it's not spirit-led? Super spiritual Christians looking for the perfect church. They haven't found it yet because it doesn't exist. Because the church is filled with people and we are all broken and imperfect. The list could go on, but I think you get the picture. It seems that we have come to a point in Christianity in America today where Christians aren't asking, which church should I go to? What they're asking is, why should I go to church at all? Maybe we all need a new perspective. If we come to an understanding that the church was never meant to be a place to go, it was designed to be a place to be. See, church isn't something we attend. It's who we are. The big picture church isn't the bricks and mortar of a building. It's a body of believers who gather together to do what God has called us to do. And the big picture perspective of that is God has called us together to love Him, to love others, and create followers. That's a mission statement here, but it's the mission statement for the global church. It's based on the Great Commandment and the Great Commission. The Great Commandment, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. I've got a very, very good friend who has a visual that he uses that I have blatantly stolen, and I don't care. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Which one of those hands points to me? None of them. And the point is that the church exists to execute the mission and share the gospel, period. See, too many of us today believe the church exists for me, to serve me, to meet my needs. But that's just not true. A couple of my favorite authors and favorite pastors, one is Erwin McManus, and he leads a church called Mosaic. He wrote in one of his books, he said, the church does not exist for us, meaning the Christians. We are the church, and we exist for the world. Bill Hybels, on a similar track, coined the phrase that just about everybody in the world, at least in Christian leadership that I know, uses. And he says, the local church is the hope of the world. When you read through the scriptures, there's a guy named Paul that wrote a lot of the New Testament. God inspired, of course. And he is trying to teach the Jewish population of his day, specifically the men, just how precious and amazing women are. And he was trying to help a culture of men who failed to value women as they should have understand just how deeply they should love their wives. And in the book of Ephesians in chapter 5, he's speaking to husbands and he says, guys, here's how much you need to love that woman. You need to love her as much as Christ loved the church. And you know how much Christ loved the church? He died for her. He died for her. Man, if Jesus felt the church was worth dying for, should his followers not value it just as much? See, failing to be fully committed to our churches is an absolute lose-lose scenario. The loss to the church is obvious. See, without you, without your willingness to love and to serve and to give and to pray, the local church will cease to exist. The church can't exist without you. You know, I had this message actually all written, basically waiting to deliver. And this was Friday of last week. And Pastor Ben came in and we were having a conversation and he reminded me of something that I felt like God wanted me to put into this message. See, he reminded me about the very first time we ever met in this space. Some of you were here. Some of you were here that 10 or so years ago, and you're still here now. And I don't know if you remember it, but I can describe it maybe to those who weren't here. It was a construction debris nightmare in this room. The room hadn't been used in so long. There's dust on the seats where people walked in and they went, I'll stand. There was no stage. There was the beginnings of a framework of a stage the Vitamin Cottage had begun to build, but then abandoned. And we were here because as a congregation, we needed to decide, is this the place that God has called us to be? And what are we willing to do to make it happen? And the reason we were here to try and make that decision is we were a church of about 150 people at the time. And they wanted $1.75 million. That's what we said. Wait, kidding me? I remember standing right on the stage. Well, it wasn't the stage, it was Remnants. And I said these words: if we choose to do this, we must grow. We must reach people who are far from Jesus, love them into the kingdom, and grow this church, because if we don't, we will die. Just the finances of it would bury us. And together, we committed to do whatever it takes. Now, that was 10 years ago. But I'll tell you, the words are still true today. You see, without you, without your willingness to love and serve and give and pray to this church, to your church, to the local church, we will die. It happens every day in America. 4 to 10 churches a week close their doors. I hope, I believe that this body of believers is every bit as committed as was the church 10 years ago. The church needs you. There's no doubt. But I wonder if you ever think about how much you need your church. So I shared this story several years ago. It's pretty appropriate for now. There's a guy named D.L. Moody. Ran a small church. he heard one of his members was going around announcing that he was done with church and he would no longer attend church services. In fact, he didn't have Facebook to spread the news, but the entire church heard of it somewhere. Did you hear about so-and-so? He's not coming to church anymore. He said he can hang out with God in nature. He doesn't need the church. He said he can pray to God in nature. He doesn't need the church. He's got a TV set and he can get his teaching from the televangelists. He doesn't need the church. Well, Moody heard about that, and he shares that he decided to go have a little conversation with the guy. This is what he writes. One winter evening, he called on this reluctant member. The two sat before a fireplace making small talk, neither one wanting to address the elephant in the room. At that point, Moody took the tongs from the fireplace, reached in and pulled out one single solitary coal and put that coal on the fireplace, whatever that stone thing is in front of it. Yeah. And they both sat in silence as they watched the coals slowly but surely burn out and die. And yet you looked at all the coals that were still in the fireplace and they were burning brightly. Moody didn't say a word. He said he got up to leave, went to the door, and the man said, "See you Sunday, Pastor." Yes, the church needs you, but you need the church as much as it needs you. If you have been hurt by the church, by someone in the church, I would like to apologize to you for them. See, despite our good intentions, we sometimes hurt the people we love most. We don't mean to, but it happens. We're humans, and we mess up. So some hurts happen from a person, maybe a well-intentioned person inside the church. But other hurts are caused less by a someone than a something. Like when a pastor teaches a biblical message that kind of rubs you the wrong way. Take God's position on marriage. Just for the record, he's for it, all right? He likes it. He invented it. But that position just isn't popular in a culture that promotes living together as if you're married without actually getting married. That rubs some people the wrong way, and they get hurt. Another hot button issue of today is God's position on sexual orientation. You see, culture demands affirmation from the church. Affirmation that the church has no right to give. See, because God doesn't affirm anything other than an intimate relationship between a man and a woman. God does not affirm the LGBTQ lifestyle or agenda. That's just the truth. And that rubs some people the wrong way. But Christians, Jesus followers, church, I need us to hear this and hear it really clearly. Just because God does not affirm, does not give the church or the people in it the right to judge or the right to hate. Amen. God says we, the church, are supposed to be accepting and loving of every human being that chooses to walk through our doors. Even those who are radically different from us. We have to rise above our prejudice and love everyone. You see, our job is to love people into God's church. It's God's job through the power of the Holy Spirit and the truth contained in His Word to help people understand places where they need to live differently. Places where they're not aligned with Him. We need to allow God to change people from the inside out. He changed me from who I was into who I am. Our judgment, our hatred, and our prejudice will simply stand in the way of allowing God to do what only God can do. See, the point of all this is that whether you were hurt by a thoughtless church member or by the teaching of hard truth, neither of those is an excuse to leave the church. See, instead, I would ask you to choose to help that member change and grow and get better. I would ask you to love that person better than they loved you so they can see it done right. If you're offended by a teaching from God's word, I want to ask you to have the courage to listen, to engage, to dig in, and discover the truth for yourself. See, I think you need to allow God to transform you by the truth rather than turning to a church that avoids the truth, or worse, teaches a false truth. I would encourage us to be the change that we want to see in the church and in Christianity. The church is far from perfect, and it won't get any better if we simply choose to leave it when it hurts us, when it no longer meets our needs, or it ceases to look the way we think that it should look. God is not calling us to go to church. He commanded us to be the church because he said the church is the hope of the world. And we can do that if we begin to look at the church for what it truly is, a place to belong, a place to believe, a place that can impact the world. We'll talk about belonging for a minute. Did you know belonging is actually a need? But belonging isn't a desire. It isn't something I just want. There is this absolute, no kidding, hardwired need in humans to belong to something bigger than ourselves. Anyone who has taken Psychology 101 has heard about a guy named Abraham Maslow that created this thing called the hierarchy of needs. See, according to his theory, there are certain needs that every human has. The very first needs that have to be met in any life: food, water, air. Those are all good things to have. Once we have those things, he says there's safety and security needs that we have to meet. You've got to have safety from attack, or dinosaurs are going to eat you, or whatever. You got to have shelter and those kind of things. Once those physiological needs are met, once those safety and security needs are met, Maslow says we have an absolute need to belong. We have a need to belong, not a desire. We need to be loved. We need to be accepted. We need to be with others and feel as though we belong to something. Isolation is unhealthy. So in all of my marriage prep classes, if I've done your marriage prep or done your wedding, pretty much every one of them, we talk about the fact that God hardwired us for relationship. He wired us to need each other. He wired us to need something, right? And I always use the same illustration, and it's from one of my favorite movies by Tom Hanks called Castaway. And you know the movie. He gets shipwrecked. Yeah. And he meets his safety, security, survival needs, right? He finds food, he does shelter, but the very next thing that has to happen, he's going absolutely nuts without somebody to talk to, and so he invents Wilson! You remember how crushed he was when Wilson fell off the raft? All of this is to say that Maslow got it right, okay? Belonging is an essential need for every living human being. You know, I'll bet some government agency paid Maslow hundreds of thousands of dollars to discover that when they could have got it for free right from the Bible. God told us a whole long time ago in Genesis 2:18, it's not good for man to be alone. The very first time in Scripture, God says something is not good. It's not good because man needs relationship. And so what did God do? He created women To which every man in the church says, praise Jesus. There you go. That man knows where his bread is buttered. So that Paul guy reinforced it in the book of Romans. He says, just as our bodies have many parts and each part has a special function, so it is with Christ's body, the church, all right? We are many parts of one body and we all belong to one another. Let me ask you in your own life, don't you feel a wonderful sense of satisfaction when you're part of something, when you belong to something? When I was in the military, Winnie and I felt such a part of a military family. There's a special camaraderie. I had a friend sitting right here that I know is a firefighter, and I know the family camaraderie that happens in that world. Anybody here a motorcycle rider? What is wrong with you people? Come on, you and me, Kelly. Motorcycle riders don't have to know each other, but you will notice if you ever ride a motorcycle, as soon as you pass one going the other way, they all wave. Every single one of them. There is something about it. Some of you belong to motorcycle groups. Some of them are not good groups, just saying, the Skull and Crossbones. But some of them, like they get together and they do these rides for Children's Hospital and they collect a bunch of money and they do good things and they love belonging to someone, to something. So how about as a Christian? How do you feel when you drive up behind someone at a stoplight and you see the fish symbol on the back of their car? Like, does that make you feel good? Do you immediately get like this, I think I like this person in front of me, unless they were being like a road rage idiot, and then you're just embarrassed. And if it was me, I'm really sorry. Drive. Oh. But anyway, mostly I get encouraged when I see this open display of someone's faith. And I know I have a kindred spirit in that car. Do you know where that symbol came from? Where it originated? It's called an ichthus, right? An ichthus. And what would happen is back in the Roman days, Christians were persecuted. If the Romans found out you were Christian, it could be really, really bad for you. Jail, maybe death, that kind of thing. Yet Christians wanted to be able to identify one another. And so they might be on a beach or somewhere where they can draw in the dirt, and they would draw the little fish symbol. And you would know that you're with someone else that knows the same Lord that you know. You're part of the same spiritual family. We belong to each other. We need each other. We were created for relationship. The church is our place to belong, but it's also a place to believe. If people continue to ask, why should I go to church instead of where does God want me to go to church? The church will die. I've made that point, I think, very clear. But here's something that goes with it. If the church dies, I believe with it dies the life-giving message of the gospel. If the church dies, evangelism will die. And here's why I believe that. There are hundreds of millions of people worldwide who are absolute, no-kidding, born-again believers. They have made that profession of faith. They have gotten baptized. They have shouted out loud, I'm a believer. Their life has evidence of belief. Of those millions, 95% of them will never share their faith with another living human being. 95% will never have the pleasure of sharing their faith journey, telling someone about Jesus, and being witness to that person making their own decision. The vast majority of decisions for Christ happen right here. They happen during an invitation given during a message by a pastor. They happen in life groups. I have seen this happen where someone starts to attend a life group, comes to a place where they understand who Jesus is and makes that decision for faith in that group. The life group wouldn't happen if the church didn't exist. Decisions for Christ happen in youth groups. Decisions for Christ happen at youth camps. My wife came to know Jesus because of a youth camp. And if the church didn't exist and didn't have the camp, would she know him today? People come to know Jesus because of the local church. And that's why the local church is the hope of the world. Because without Jesus, there is no hope. Amen. You believe in God, but not in his church? I am convinced without the church, evangelism dies. Because Lone Ranger Christians don't have the courage to share their faith. I got a lot of favorite passages, but this is like a favorite, like with an exclamation. Romans 10:13. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. The two words in there I love most. Everyone. 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 Doesn't matter who you are. Everyone can call on the name of the Lord and be saved. Saved means to spend eternity where God is instead of spend eternity where God's not. But it goes on to say, how then can they call on the one they've not believed in? How can they believe in the one in whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? 95% of Christians in the world will never preach. It happens in the church. Without the local church, the gospel dies. The local church is the hope of the world. And you can choose to belong. And when you belong, you're going to begin to believe if you didn't when you came in. And those of us who do believe and choose to belong will believe more deeply. We'll grow in our faith. Then we'll begin to actually be the church. That's when we get challenged by passages like you find in the book of James. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Do what it says. The more you attend the church, the more you hear the teaching, the more convicted you get inside about your own spiritual growth and depth of faith. You begin to become obedient to what God asks you to do. And when that happens, we begin to make a difference in our communities. We actually begin to share our faith with others. We can be part of the 5% instead of the 95%. We invite others to church where they get to hear and believe and be saved. If you believe in God, I'm telling you, you have no choice but to believe in the church his son died for. Several years ago, I got to share a message, and I asked you to dream. I asked you to imagine. I think Ephesians 3:20 was even the foundation for that, though I'm not sure. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all you can ask or imagine or dream, right? I asked you to imagine living in a community where the community was actually thankful the church existed. Where the impact the church made on the people in the local community was so great that if the church ever folded and closed its doors, they would be like, oh, man. I asked if you could imagine city leaders valuing your church so much, they not only welcomed our participation with them, but they actually invited the faith to community to be a part of what they were doing. I asked if you could imagine hundreds, maybe even thousands of people spending eternity where God is instead of where he's not, simply because he decided to start this church and you decided to belong. Here's the deal. In several years later, looking in retrospect, some of those things we no longer have to imagine because they've happened. See, our Lakewood Pastors Group is deeply involved with Jefferson County Human Services, with Mayor Adam Paul, with the City Council, with the local schools, and with the Chief of Police. Not because we forced our way in their doors, but because they invited us. to come and be a part of what they were doing to make a difference in our community. Our school invites us to come over and tutor their kids, and we get to tell them about Jesus. I can't even begin to tell you. You talk about a community that appreciates the church exists. The number of people who thank us and are genuinely grateful that we're here. 3,600 children just last year who got toys because this church exists. I think about the kids we do tutor at WizKids and their families who are grateful we're in this community. I think about the number of families who would go hungry again if it wasn't for the King's Cupboard Food Bank and the clothing that it provides. We have baptized several hundred new believers, and we pray for thousands more through the church plants that we believe God is going to start through us. We've already started a new church in Estonia that's made a difference there. Think about the missionaries that we support and the difference they're making in Ecuador and Estonia and Thailand and Argentina. They all get to do what God has called them to do because the local church exists. Christian atheists believe in God, but act as if they don't believe in his church. We need to be different. Sunday morning can no longer be a day to sleep in. Now I know, you're not going to be here 52 weeks a year, for crying out loud. I work here and I'm not here 52 weeks a year. But church has to be the priority on Sunday, not the afterthought. It's no longer a day to wake up and mow the grass. It's no longer a day where a child's sports attendance is more important than their spiritual condition. Sunday morning can no longer be just another day of the week. It needs to return to a day where we honor and revere our God. Church can no longer be a place you go to get your worship fix and go home until next Sunday. It has to be a place where we choose to love and serve one another. It has to be a place we choose to give of ourselves and love and serve the community. It has to be a place where we have the courage to give generously from our finances, and not out of duty, but because that's what we do. Because the local church is the hope of the world. See, the church has to be something that we love as deeply as Jesus did. Just how far are you and I willing to go for his church? Are we willing to die for it? Are we willing to sacrifice for it? Are we willing to go as far as Jesus did? God stepped out of heaven in the person of Jesus Christ, willingly went to a cross and died for his church, us.